I'm sorry, Rebecca. It's just not working anymore. Those words hung in our pristine kitchen, suspended between us like toxic gas. David stood there in his tailored Brooks Brothers suit, the one I'd helped him pick for his promotion last year. His perfectly manicured hands gripped the Italian marble countertop I'd selected during our renovation. I carefully set down my coffee mug, the wedding gift from his parents with our initials intertwined in gold leaf. 8 years of marriage dissolved, with a sentence so cliché it was almost comical. Not working? I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt. After 8 years, that's your explanation? He had the decency to look uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one polished Oxford to the other. The early morning sun streamed through our kitchen skylights, highlighting the silver threads beginning to appear at his temples. At 42, David Harrison looked every bit the successful investment banker, confident, polished, untouchable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you, until now. Now he looked like a man who couldn't meet my eyes. I think we both know we've been drifting apart, he said, his voice taking on that reasonable tone he used with difficult clients. I was being managed. We want different things. Different things, I echoed. Such as? He glanced at his watch. The Rolex I'd given him for our 5th anniversary, and sighed. Rebecca, I have a morning meeting. Can we discuss the details this evening? A laugh escaped me, surprising us both. You're leaving me, but your morning meeting takes priority? How efficient of you, David. I took a deliberate sip of my coffee, now gone cold. Part of me, the trained corporate attorney part, was already cataloging assets, calculating divisions, preparing for battle. The other part, the woman who had loved this man for a decade, was struggling to breathe. It's the Jensen acquisition. I can't reschedule. His tone held a note of frustration, as if I were being deliberately difficult. By all means, go secure that acquisition. I'll just sit here and contemplate the dissolution of our marriage. He reached for his briefcase, Italian leather that still smelled new. I know this is hard. Do you? I interrupted, my voice sharp. Because from where I'm sitting, you seem remarkably composed for someone dismantling their life. A flash of irritation crossed his face. I've been thinking about this for a while. Those words hit harder than his initial announcement. While I'd been renovating our home, planning our future, he'd been thinking about this for a while. How long is a while, David? He checked his watch again. Rebecca, how long? He sighed, finally meeting my eyes. About 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Half a year of me, oblivious, making dinner reservations, planning our summer vacation to the Amalfi Coast, discussing whether we should finally start trying for a baby. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I see. I stood up, smoothing my silk robe. Another gift from him, last Christmas. Don't let me keep you from your meeting. Relief flashed across his face, quickly masked with concern. We'll talk tonight, I promise. I nodded, not trusting myself. To speak. He hesitated, then leaned in to kiss my cheek out of habit. I turned away, and his lips met air. Tonight, he repeated, then grabbed his briefcase and was gone, the sound of our front door closing with its usual solid thunk. I remained perfectly still until I heard his BMW pull out of our circular driveway. Then, methodically, I picked up my coffee mug and hurled it against the wall, watching it shatter into 100 pieces, coffee streaking down our custom wallpaper like tears. 6 months, I repeated into my phone, pacing the length of my home office. My friend Mia was silent. On the other end, absorbing the bomb I'd just dropped. That calculating bastard, she finally breathed. Are you okay? I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. Surprisingly functional. I think I'm in shock. Do you know who she is? I stopped pacing. Who? Rebecca. Honey. There's always someone else when they suddenly decide things aren't working. The thought hadn't even occurred to me. David, with someone else? My mind raced through possibilities. Clients, colleagues, our social circle. I mentally cataloged every female name he'd mentioned recently, every late meeting, every business trip. I don't know, I admitted. He didn't say. He wouldn't, Mia said flatly. But trust me, there's someone. I sank into my desk chair, suddenly exhausted. Does it matter? It might, especially if it's someone from his office. Infidelity can impact your settlement. Mia wasn't just my best friend. She was also a divorce attorney with a reputation for leaving opposing counsel in tears. I'd witnessed her efficiency firsthand when she'd handled my sister's divorce 3 years ago. I don't want to think about settlements yet. He's only just told me this morning. That's exactly when you should be thinking about it. Mia's voice sharpened with professional concern. While he's busy with his Jensen acquisition, he's probably also consulting with lawyers. You need to get ahead of this, Becca. I glanced around my office, at the framed degrees on the wall, Stanford Law, my admission to the California Bar, awards from my years at Simmons & Welch before I'd stepped back to a consulting role after marrying David. I'd wanted more flexibility. Time to start a family. The irony wasn't lost on me. You're right, I admitted. What's my first move? Documentation. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds, tax returns. Get copies of everything before he has a chance to hide assets. I opened my laptop. I have access to most of our accounts. Get everything today. Once you start formal proceedings, that access might disappear. I began typing, making a list. Our checking and savings, investment portfolios, the house in Pacific Heights, the cabin in Lake Tahoe, our art collection, which we'd started as newlyweds, now worth considerably more than we'd paid. What about the properties under Harrison Holdings? I asked, referring to the limited liability company we'd created for our real estate investments. Everything, Mia said firmly. And Rebecca, I know he's the investment banker, but don't underestimate your contributions. Half of everything you've built together is yours. After we hung up, I sat staring at my list, systematically working. Through each item, downloading statements, taking screenshots, emailing documents to myself at an account David didn't know about. By noon, I had a comprehensive record of our financial life together. The numbers were reassuring in their clarity. Whatever emotional devastation I was facing, at least the financial picture was straightforward. California was a community property state. Half was mine. I was about to close my laptop when a new email notification appeared. David's assistant confirming our reservation at Gary Danko for 8 p.m. tonight. Apparently, my husband had decided to end our marriage over fine dining and a good Cabernet. How considerate. I arrived at Gary Danko at precisely 8:05 p.m., making David wait just long enough to notice. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a black Valentino, dress that hit just above the knee, tasteful but unmistakably expensive. My grandmother's pearl earrings, the Louboutins David had bought me for my last birthday, armor. The maitre d' led me to our table, where David was already nursing a scotch. He stood as I approached, his eyes widening slightly as he took in my appearance. You look beautiful, he said, sounding surprised. Thank you. I smiled at the sommelier who appeared at my elbow. I'll have a glass of the Veuve Clicquot. David raised an eyebrow. Champagne? Is that inappropriate for the occasion? I asked, my tone light. I wasn't aware of the proper etiquette for being informed one's marriage is over. He winced. Rebecca, no, please, I interrupted, maintaining my smile as the sommelier poured my champagne. You've had 6 months to prepare for this conversation. I've had 10 hours. I think I'm entitled to a little liquid courage. Once we were alone, David leaned forward, his expression serious. I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. And yet, here we are. He sighed. I care about you deeply. I always will. But we've grown in different directions. You must have felt it too. Had I? There had been moments, certainly. Dinners where conversation lagged, weekends spent in companionable but separate activities, the subtle shift from passionate to comfortable. But I'd attributed that to the natural evolution of a long-term relationship, not its demise. What I felt, I said carefully, was that we were building a life together. A good one. We were. We did. He took another sip of his scotch. But I think we both deserve more than just contentment? Contentment, I repeated, turning the word over. Most people would consider that a worthy goal. I'm not most people, he said, with a flash of the confidence that had first attracted me. To him. And neither are you. You used to be ambitious, driven. You had plans. I still have plans. They included you. He looked away, and I knew then that Mia was right. There was someone else. I could see it in the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes, in the carefully rehearsed quality of his explanations. Who is she? I asked quietly. His head snapped up. What? The woman you're leaving me for. Who is she? A muscle twitched in his jaw. This isn't about anyone else. Don't insult my intelligence, David. Not after 8 years. Our appetizers arrived, an unwelcome interruption. The foie gras he'd ordered for himself, the roasted beet salad for me. He still remembered my preferences, even as he was abandoning our marriage. The intimacy of it was suddenly unbearable. When the server departed, David set down his fork without taking a bite. Her name is Alexis. She works at the firm. Alexis. I searched my memory for mentions of this name, for any clue I might have missed. Your assistant? He nodded, having the grace to look ashamed. A laugh escaped me, bitter and sharp. How breathtakingly. Original of you. The middle-aged banker and his young assistant. It's not like that, he protested. She's 28, highly educated. I don't need her resume, David. I'm just saying it's not some cliché. We connected intellectually. She understands the demands of my work in a way that... He stopped himself, but not quickly enough. In a way that I don't? I finished for him. Because I chose to scale back. My career? Because I wanted us to have a life outside of work? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I knew well. I didn't come here to argue. No, you came here to deliver your prepackaged explanation for why you're leaving me for someone a decade younger. Forgive me if I'm not making it easy for you. Silence fell between us, heavy with unspoken accusations. Around us, other diners enjoyed their meals, oblivious to the collapse happening at our table. How long? I finally asked. He looked confused. I told you 6 months. No, I cut him off. How long have you been sleeping with her? His face flushed. Rebecca, I deserve to know. He exhaled slowly. 4 months. 4 months. While we'd celebrated our anniversary. While we'd hosted his parents for Christmas. While we'd lain in bed discussing whether to redecorate the guest room as a nursery. I see. I took a long sip of champagne, letting the bubbles burn down my throat. And now what? You move in with Alexis, and we sell. The house? I was thinking you might want to keep the house, he said, as if offering a generous concession. It means a lot to you. It means a lot to both of us. We designed every inch together. He shifted uncomfortably. I know, but I thought, with the settlement, you might want the stability. I set down my glass. The settlement. Yes. I've been talking to my lawyer. How proactive of you. And I'm prepared to be more than fair. You'll get the house, of course, and a generous monthly maintenance until you get back on your feet. Maintenance. as if I were a car requiring regular servicing, as if I hadn't contributed equally to our marriage, to our wealth. "How generous of you," I said, the words coated in ice. "And what exactly does more than fair entail?" He named a figure that was, indeed, generous by normal standards, but not by the standards of what we actually owned together. "I see," I said, maintaining a neutral expression. "And Harrison Holdings?" A flicker of surprise crossed his face. "The LLC is primarily for my business investments. My lawyer advised that since I formed it, and I make all the investment decisions, with our joint funds," I interrupted. "And if I recall correctly, I'm listed as a managing member." He frowned. "Technically, yes. But Rebecca, be reasonable. Those properties are tied to my business relationships. It would be messy to divide them." "Messier than adultery." He flinched. "I'm trying to be fair here." "No, you're trying to control the narrative, just like you controlled the timing of telling me our marriage was over, just like you're controlling this entire conversation." "That's not true." "It is," I said, suddenly tired. "But here's what you've forgotten, David. I'm not some helpless housewife. I have a law degree. I have friends in high places. And half of everything we've built is legally mine." His expression hardened. "So that's how it's going to be? A legal battle?" "That depends entirely on you," I said, standing up, "on whether your definition of fair matches reality." He remained seated, looking up at me with a mixture of surprise and frustration. "Where are you going? We haven't even had our entrees." I dropped my napkin onto the table. "I've lost my appetite. But please enjoy your meal. Put it on our joint card. While you still can." As I walked out of the restaurant into the cool San Francisco night, I felt something unexpected. Power. For the first time since that morning, I wasn't reacting to David's script. I was writing my own. The next morning, I called Mia before my first cup of coffee had finished brewing. "I need the name of the most ruthless divorce attorney in the city," I said when she answered. "Not you. I need you as my friend right now, but someone who will make David regret ever thinking he could lowball me." "Veronica Zhang," Mia replied without hesitation. "She made her name destroying tech bros in divorces. She's expensive, but worth every penny." "Perfect. Can you get me an appointment today?" "For you?" "Absolutely." 3 hours later, I was seated in Veronica Zhang's minimalist office, surrounded by views of the Bay Bridge and abstract art that probably cost more than most people's cars. Veronica herself was a study in controlled precision, sharp bob, sharper eyes, and a pantsuit that whispered expensive authority. She listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making notes on a sleek tablet. "So that's it," I concluded. "My husband is leaving me for his assistant, and he thinks I should be grateful for the house and an allowance, while he keeps control of our most valuable assets." Veronica's smile was thin. "Men like your husband rely on emotion clouding judgment. They expect tears, bargaining, denial, all of which distract from the financial reality." "There will be no tears," I assured her. "At least not during negotiations." "Good." She set down her tablet. "Now tell me about Harrison Holdings." I pulled out the folder I'd prepared. "The LLC owns 6 commercial properties throughout the Bay Area. Total portfolio value of approximately $15 million. I have copies of all the documentation, including the operating agreement listing me as a managing member." Veronica flipped through the papers, her expression revealing nothing. "And these properties are currently leased?" 5 of them. The 6th, a converted warehouse in Soma, is being renovated. It's scheduled to be completed next month. VentureTech has already signed a 5-year lease to move in as soon as it's ready. "VentureTech," Veronica repeated, looking up. "The same company involved in the Jensen acquisition your husband mentioned?" I nodded, a small smile playing at my lips. "The very same. David's been working on that deal for months. It's a major coup for his firm. Understanding dawned in Veronica's eyes. And if VentureTech's new headquarters suddenly became unavailable, it would jeopardize the entire acquisition, I finished, not to mention his commission, which I estimate to be around $2 million. Veronica leaned back in her chair, studying me with new appreciation. Mrs. Harrison, I think we're going to work very well together. Ms. Stevens, I corrected. I kept my name professionally, and yes, I believe we will. That evening, I was sorting through the closet in our bedroom, cataloging suits, shoes, watches, when I heard the front door open. David's footsteps echoed through the house, hesitant in a way they'd never been before. Rebecca? He called from the foyer. Upstairs, I replied, continuing my inventory. He appeared in the doorway moments later, looking tired and wary. His eyes widened as he took in the organization happening in his closet. What are you doing? Making a list, I said simply. For the asset division. He set down his briefcase with a sigh. I thought we could discuss this civilly. We can. I'm just ensuring I have accurate information. I held up one of his watches. Patek Philippe, purchased in 2020. Current market value, approximately $35,000. This feels unnecessarily adversarial. I smiled without warmth. Does it? I'm simply being thorough, something you taught me to value. He loosened his tie, a gesture of discomfort. I spoke with my lawyer again today. As did I. Surprise flickered across his face. You've retained counsel already? Veronica Zhang. Perhaps you've heard of her. The color drained from his face. Veronica's reputation preceded her, especially in financial circles. That seems premature. Does it? You've been consulting your lawyer for some time, according to our dinner conversation. He sank onto the edge of the bed. I was hoping we could reach an amicable agreement without turning this into a legal battlefield. As was I said pleasantly. Unfortunately, your definition of fair seems to diverge significantly from reality. Rebecca, for instance, I continued, your assertion that Harrison Holdings should remain solely under your control, despite my legal status as a managing member and the properties being purchased with marital funds. His expression hardened. Those investments are intricately tied to my business relationships. Yes, I agreed, particularly the Soma property and VentureTech. I understand they're central to the Jensen acquisition. The look of shock on his face was worth every painful moment of the past 2 days. How do you know about that? I finished. For him. I pay attention, David. I always have. You just stopped noticing. He stood up, agitation evident in every line of his body. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. Harrison Holdings is a marital asset. The Soma property is part of that asset. What happens with that property affects your deal with VentureTech, which affects the Jensen acquisition. You wouldn't jeopardize that deal. It would be financially self-destructive. I shrugged, the picture of casual indifference. Perhaps. Or perhaps I'm willing to accept some financial loss to ensure equity. This is blackmail, he said, voice low with anger. No, David. This is negotiation. Something you excel at professionally but seem to have forgotten applies to personal matters as well. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. What do you want? What I'm entitled to, half of everything we built together, including Harrison Holdings. That's not reasonable. Your affair with your 28-year-old assistant isn't reasonable. Your attempt to control the timing, terms, and narrative of our divorce isn't reasonable. I set down the watch I'd been holding. But here we are. Silence stretched between us, thick with tension and the remnants of what had once been love. I'll have my lawyer contact Ms. Zhang, he finally said, voice tight. Excellent. In the meantime, I think it's best if you stay elsewhere. This is my house too. Yes, and you're welcome to contest my request in court, I said calmly. But given that you're the one who's been unfaithful, and given California's approach to such matters, I suggest you choose your battles wisely. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, not the accommodating wife he'd taken for granted, but the lawyer who had once struck fear in opposing counsel. Without another word, he grabbed a suitcase from the closet and began filling it with clothes. I left him to it, walking downstairs to pour myself a glass of the Barolo we'd been saving for a special occasion. As I sipped the rich red wine, I heard him moving around upstairs, the sounds of his departure echoing through the house we'd built together. When he finally came downstairs, suitcase in hand, he paused in the living room where I sat. For what it's worth, he said quietly. I never meant for things to end this way. I looked up at him, this man I had loved for a decade, now a stranger preparing to start a new life with another woman. But they have ended this way, I replied. And now we both have to live with the consequences. The front door closed behind him with a finality that should have devastated me. Instead, I felt the first stirrings of something unexpected. Freedom. Took another sip of wine and opened my laptop. I had properties to research, valuations to review, and a future to plan. One that no longer revolved around David Harrison and his expectations. Let him think I was being vindictive about the Soma property. Let him worry about his precious acquisition. The truth was both simpler and more complex. The week following David's departure unfolded in a series of tactical maneuvers, like a high-stakes chess match where neither player was willing to sacrifice their queen. My phone rang at precisely 8:15 a.m. on Monday morning. Veronica, already at her desk for hours, no doubt. They've made initial contact, she said without preamble. David's attorney is Martin Golding. I frowned, the name immediately familiar. The one who handled the Brightman divorce last year? The very same. Known for aggressive posturing followed by rapid settlement offers. He doesn't like going to court. Prefers to intimidate opposing counsel into accepting less than their clients deserve. I smiled into my coffee. Then he's picked the wrong opposing counsel. Indeed, Veronica agreed, a hint of predatory satisfaction in her voice. They're requesting a preliminary meeting to discuss terms. So soon? David must be worried about the venture tech situation. Almost certainly. Golding proposed Wednesday at their offices. Counter with tomorrow at yours, I replied. Let's not give them time to get comfortable. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Harrison Holdings documents again. The Soma property was my strongest leverage point, but I needed more. David would expect me to play that card. I needed something he wouldn't see coming. I scrolled through the operating agreement, reading each clause carefully. There, in Section 7.3, was exactly what I needed. Major decisions regarding property management, leasing, or disposition require unanimous consent of all managing members. As a managing member, I had effective veto power over any decisions regarding the properties, including the one in Pacific Heights that had been leased to Meridian Capital for the past 3 years. Meridian Capital, where David's close friend Charles Fitzwilliam was a senior partner. The lease was up for renewal next month. I picked up my phone again, this time calling the commercial property manager who handled the day-to-day operations of Harrison Holdings. Rebecca. Stephen's calling for Marcus Watkins, I said when his assistant answered. Marcus came on the line moments later, his tone cautiously professional. Rebecca, what a surprise. How can I help you? I'm reviewing the lease renewal for the Meridian Capital property, I said smoothly. Can you send me the current draft? A pause. I wasn't aware you were handling that. David and I are restructuring our business responsibilities, I interrupted. As a managing member of Harrison Holdings, I'll be taking a more active role moving forward. Another pause, longer this time. I see. Let me check with David first. That won't be necessary, Marcus. Our operating agreement is quite clear on my authority. The lease renewal documents, please. Today. By that afternoon, I had what I needed. The draft lease renewal offering Meridian Capital terms well below market rate. A friendly deal for Charles Fitzwilliam that David had never bothered to discuss with me. I made a quick call to Mia, who worked in the same building as Meridian. "What's the going rate for Class A office space in your building these days?" I asked. "About $85 per square foot annually." "Why?" I looked at the draft lease. $65. That's what David's offering Meridian for their renewal. Mia whistled. "That's a sweetheart deal, especially in this market." "Indeed. Now what would happen if that rate suddenly jumped to market value?" "Charles Fitzwilliam would have a coronary," Mia replied. "Meridian's been struggling since they lost the Westlake account. A 30% increase in rent would hurt." "How interesting," I murmured. "And how convenient that I now have 2 points of leverage." The next morning, I dressed with deliberate care for the meeting with David's attorney. A charcoal gray Armani suit, subtle pearl jewelry, hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. Professional, polished, formidable. Veronica's office projected exactly the image she cultivated. Success without ostentation, power without flashiness. The conference room overlooked the bay, the view a subtle reminder of the high stakes involved. David. And his attorney arrived precisely on time. Martin Golding looked exactly as I'd expected, silver-haired, tan, with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to getting his way. David, by contrast, appeared tired, the dark circles under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. "Good. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," Golding began after perfunctory introductions. "I believe we all want to resolve this situation as amicably and efficiently as possible." Veronica's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Efficiency depends entirely on reasonableness, Mr. Golding. Let's see if we can establish that today." She slid a document across the table. "Our initial position, outlining Mrs. Stevens's rightful claim to marital assets." Golding scanned the document, his expression carefully neutral until he reached the section on Harrison Holdings. Then his eyebrows rose fractionally. "This is ambitious," he said finally. "It's equitable," Veronica countered. "California law is quite clear on community, property principles. The LLC was formed by my client, managed by my client. Co-managed," I interrupted. "As the operating agreement clearly states." David spoke for the first time. "Rebecca, you've never been involved in the day-to-day operations of Harrison Holdings. That was our arrangement. An arrangement that preserved your control while I built our home and supported your career," I replied evenly. "But legally, I've always been a managing member with equal authority." "A technicality," Golding interjected. "The law is built on technicalities, Mr. Golding," Veronica replied. "As you well know." David leaned forward. "Be reasonable, Rebecca. Those properties are tied to my business relationships. My clients, my contacts, like Charles Fitzwilliam?" I asked innocently. David stiffened. "What about him?" "I was reviewing the lease renewal for Meridian Capital. Interesting terms you've offered. Well below market rate." Golding placed a restraining hand on David's arm. "We're getting off track. The Harrison Holdings portfolio is just one component of a complex marital estate. A component valued at approximately $15 million, Veronica noted. Hardly insignificant. We're prepared to be generous regarding other assets, Golding continued, smoothly. The Pacific Heights residence, for instance. Mr. Harrison is willing to relinquish his claim entirely. How magnanimous, I murmured, considering I designed every inch of it. David's jaw tightened. I'm trying to be fair. Fair would be acknowledging my equal stake in everything we built together, I replied, including Harrison Holdings. Which brings us to the Soma property, Veronica interjected, her tone deceptively casual. I understand VentureTech is quite eager to move in once renovations are complete. David and Golding exchanged glances. The VentureTech lease is signed. And binding, Golding said carefully. On both parties, Veronica agreed, assuming the property is available as promised. Are you threatening to interfere with a valid lease agreement? Golding's voice sharpened. Not at all, I replied. I'm simply pointing out that as a managing member of Harrison Holdings, I have certain rights regarding major decisions, rights I've neglected to exercise until now. The conference room fell silent as the implications hung in the air. David's face had gone pale, his fingers drumming a nervous tattoo on the polished table. This approach seems unnecessarily contentious, Golding finally said. On the contrary, Veronica countered, we're simply establishing the factual and legal framework for our negotiations. Ms. Stevens has equal rights to all marital assets, including the LLC. That's our starting point. Starting points can be flexible, Golding offered. Some more than others, Veronica agreed. We'll need to see your full financial disclosure before we can discuss specifics further. Of course, Golding nodded, gathering his papers. We'll have that to you by week's end. As they stood to leave, I caught David's eye. Oh, and David? I've scheduled a meeting with Charles Fitzwilliam tomorrow to discuss the Meridian lease renewal. I thought you should know. The flash of panic in his eyes was immensely satisfying. After they'd left, Veronica turned to me with newfound respect. You didn't mention the Meridian situation. I was saving it, I admitted. David values his relationship with Fitzwilliam almost as much as the VentureTech deal. Charles was his mentor at Goldman before they both moved on. 2 pressure points are better than one, Veronica nodded approvingly, especially when the second is unexpected. David always underestimated me, I said, gathering my belongings. That's about to become very expensive for him. Charles Fitzwilliam's assistant showed me into his corner office precisely at 2 p.m. the next day. Charles rose from behind his massive desk, his expression a careful mask of professional courtesy. Rebecca, what an unexpected pleasure, he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. Though I must admit, I was surprised by your meeting request. I'm sure you were, I agreed pleasantly. But as a managing member of Harrison Holdings, I felt it was important we discuss the terms of your lease renewal directly. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I was under the impression that David handled those matters. Things change, I said simply, including, it seems, the management structure of Harrison Holdings. I placed a folder on his desk. I've taken the liberty of revising the renewal terms to better reflect current market conditions. Charles opened the folder, scanning the document inside. His eyebrows rose, then drew together in a frown. This represents a significant increase from our current rate, he said carefully. It represents the actual market value, I corrected. As I'm sure you're aware, the previous rate was preferential. Charles leaned back in his chair, studying me with new interest. David and I have a long-standing relationship. Yes, I know. Goldman Sachs, racquetball on Thursdays, single malt scotch, and mutual back-scratching. I smiled. But David is no longer the sole decision-maker for Harrison Holdings properties. I see. Charles tapped his fingers on the folder. And may I ask what prompted this reorganization? You may ask David that question next time you see him, I replied evenly. In the meantime, we need to discuss your options regarding this lease. Charles's expression hardened slightly. I assume there's room for negotiation? There's always room for negotiation, Charles. The question is, what do you have to offer? He studied me for a long moment. What exactly are you looking for, Rebecca? Information, I said simply, about David's investments outside of our disclosed portfolios. Charles's eyes widened fractionally. I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking directly. David's always been ambitious, and I've always suspected he had side investments he didn't disclose. Investments you might have advised him on or participated in. That would be confidential, Charles said carefully. I nodded toward the folder on his desk. So is the discount you've been enjoying on your office space a discount that costs Harrison Holdings approximately $400,000 annually? Multiply that by the 3 years of your last lease, and we're talking about $1.2 million in effective subsidy. Charles's expression remained neutral, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. You've become quite the businesswoman, Rebecca. I've always been a businesswoman, Charles. David just preferred I focus my talents elsewhere. I stood, smoothing my skirt. Take a day to consider your options. If you'd prefer not to have our conversation, the new lease terms stand as presented. If you're feeling more communicative, perhaps we can reach a more flexible arrangement. As I walked out of Meridian Capital into the bright afternoon sunshine, my phone buzzed with a text from David. What the hell are you doing with Charles? I smiled and slipped my phone back into my purse without replying. Let him stew. The next morning, I was reviewing property values in the Harrison Holdings portfolio when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find David standing on the porch, looking disheveled and agitated. We need to talk, he said without preamble. Do we? I believe that's why we have attorneys. This isn't about the divorce, he snapped. It's about you threatening my business relationships. I raised an eyebrow. Threatening? I simply had a business conversation with Charles Fitzwilliam regarding a lease that requires my approval as a managing member of Harrison Holdings. You're playing games, Rebecca. Dangerous ones. No, David. I'm finally participating in business decisions that affect our joint assets. Something you never wanted me to do before. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Charles called me in a panic. What exactly did you say to him? That's between Charles and me, I replied calmly. Though I'm curious why a simple lease discussion would cause panic. David's expression darkened. You know exactly what you're doing. The Venture Tech lease, now Meridian. You're systematically targeting my most important business relationships. I'm exercising my legal rights as a managing member of our LLC, I corrected. Rights you never expected me to use. This isn't you, Rebecca. You're not vindictive. This isn't about vindication, I replied, though part of me disagreed. It's about equity. You made decisions about our marriage unilaterally. You don't get to do the same with our assets. David's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression tightening further. Great. Now, Peterson from Venture Tech is calling. What did you say to him? Nothing yet, I smiled. But thank you for reminding me to reach out. David stepped closer, his voice dropping. Rebecca, listen to me. The Jensen acquisition is worth millions to my firm. If Venture Tech pulls out of the Soma lease, then your commission disappears. I finished for him. How unfortunate. It's not just my commission, it's my reputation, my career. You should have thought about that before you started sleeping with your assistant. David flinched as if I'd slapped him. So that's what this is. Revenge. No, I said quietly. This is negotiation. You've left me with very few bargaining chips, David. I'm simply using the ones I have. He stared at me, a mixture of anger and something that might have been respect crossing his face. What do you want? What I've always wanted. A fair division of everything we built together, including Harrison Holdings. That's not possible. The LLC is integral to my business. Then perhaps you should have considered that before throwing away our marriage. I glanced at my watch. I have a call in 10 minutes. We're done here. As I closed the door on his protests, my phone buzzed with a text from Charles Fitzwilliam. I've reconsidered your proposal. Let's meet tomorrow. There are matters you should be aware of. I smiled. The chess pieces were moving exactly as I'd anticipated. Charles Fitzwilliam looked distinctly uncomfortable as we sat in a private booth at the back of Spruce, a restaurant far enough from both our usual haunts to minimize the chance of being seen. Thank you for meeting me, he said, studying the wine list with unusual intensity. Thank you for reconsidering our conversation, I replied. After ordering, Charles leaned forward, his voice low. What I'm about to tell you is strictly confidential. If David knew I was sharing this information, your conversation with me is protected by the same confidentiality that has apparently protected your lease arrangements for years, I assured him. Charles nodded, then took a deep breath. 3 years ago, David approached me about a private investment opportunity, a development project in Austin. Off the books, high returns, minimally documented. Go on, I encouraged, my pulse quickening. The initial investment was $1.5 million. Returns have been substantial. The latest valuation puts his share at approximately $4.8 million. I kept my expression neutral despite the shock. $4.8 million that was never disclosed in our joint financial statements. I assumed you knew, Charles said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Clearly not. I took a sip of water, organizing my thoughts. Are there other similar investments? Charles hesitated, then nodded. 2 others that I'm aware of. A tech startup in Seattle, approximately $800,000 initial investment, now worth about $3.2 million. And a boutique hotel development in Nashville, $1.2 million invested, current value unknown but estimated at $2.5 million. The numbers were staggering. Nearly $10.5 million in undisclosed assets that legally should be part of our community property. Do you have documentation? I asked. Charles reached into his jacket and withdrew a USB drive. Everything I could gather without raising suspicion, investment agreements, wire transfers, quarterly reports. It's not complete, but it's enough to establish the existence and approximate value of these investments. I took the drive, tucking it into my purse. And why are you sharing this now, Charles? He met my eyes directly for the first time. Let's just say that David hasn't always been the most loyal business partner. There have been opportunities. He's redirected for his personal benefit that should have been presented to Meridian first. Betrayal upon betrayal. The pattern was becoming clear. About your lease, I said, changing tack. I'm willing to offer a 10% increase rather than the 30% in my initial proposal, significantly below market rate, but not quite the gift David was offering. Charles nodded, relief evident in his expression. That's manageable. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I cautioned. I may need your testimony if David contests the existence of these hidden investments. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Charles replied, signaling for more wine. David can be vindictive when crossed. I smiled, a cold expression that made Charles blink. So can I, Charles, as everyone is about to discover. Later that evening, I sat in my home office, reviewing the contents of the USB drive Charles had provided. The documentation was damning. Wire transfers from accounts I'd never seen, LLC agreements listing David as the sole member, quarterly reports showing substantial returns, all dated during our marriage. I forwarded everything to Veronica with a brief message. Undisclosed assets discovered. Approximately $10.5 million documentation attached. Her response came minutes later. This changes everything. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. I leaned back in my chair, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over me. David had hidden millions while offering me what he'd characterized as a generous settlement. He'd lied not just about our marriage, but about our finances, the ultimate betrayal in a partnership supposedly built on trust. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Venture Tech is threatening to pull out of the Soma lease. What did you do? I smiled and set my phone aside without replying. Let him panic. Let him wonder. Let him finally understand what it felt like to have the foundation of your life pulled out from under you without warning. Tomorrow would bring a new phase in our negotiations, one where I held considerably more cards than David realized. his hidden millions, his precious venture tech deal, his sweetheart arrangement with Charles, all leverage points in a game he'd never expected me to play, much less win. But the real victory wasn't just in discovering his deception or threatening his business deals. It was in reclaiming my own power. Piece by carefully calculated piece. And I was just getting started. Veronica's office hummed with energy the next morning. 3 associates were already assembled in the conference room, surrounded by stacks of documents and open laptops, a war room, preparing for battle. "This is impressive," I said, nodding toward the USB drive now connected to the main computer. I didn't expect such a quick response. Hidden assets in a high-profile divorce? Veronica smiled thinly. "We live for these moments," she gestured to a young woman with sharp eyes and a sharper bob. "This is Amara, our forensic accounting specialist. She's been analyzing the documents all night." Amara nodded briskly. "The paper trail is surprisingly thorough. Mr. Harrison apparently didn't expect anyone to find these investments, so he wasn't particularly careful about documentation. Men like David often mistake their wives' trust for ignorance," Veronica observed. "It's a costly error." I studied the financial diagram Amara had created on a large whiteboard, a complex web of LLCs, investments, and money flows. "He used our joint funds for the initial investments," I noted, tracing the arrows from accounts I recognized to the shell companies David had created. "Yes," Amara confirmed. "We've identified transfers from your joint brokerage account to these 3 entities between 2019 and 2021. The total diverted funds amount to approximately $3.5 million, Sarter, which have now grown to over $10 million, Veronica added. Community property that Mr. Harrison conveniently omitted from his financial disclosures." "What's our next move?" I asked. Veronica's smile was predatory. "We request an emergency hearing with the court. Non-disclosure of assets is a serious violation of California family law. Judges tend to take a dim view of such behavior." "How dim?" "In extreme cases, the court can award the entirety of the hidden assets to the wronged spouse," Veronica replied. "Though more commonly, they impose severe financial penalties and shift the overall asset division more favorably toward the innocent party." I considered this. "What's our timeline?" "We can file the motion today. Given the circumstances and the amounts involved, we should get a hearing within the week." "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime," Veronica said, "we maintain pressure on all fronts. The venture tech lease, the Meridian situation, and now these hidden investments. Mr. Harrison is about to find himself fighting fires on multiple fronts." I nodded, a plan crystallizing. "I have a meeting with Alan Peterson from Venture Tech this afternoon. He wants to discuss concerns about the Soma property." "Perfect," Veronica approved. "Keep that pressure point active, but don't make any definitive threats. We want leverage, not legal complications." As I left Veronica's office, my phone buzzed with a message from David. "This has gone far enough. We need to talk. Dinner tonight? At SPQR, 7 p.m. I considered ignoring it, but strategic engagement was wiser than silence. "I'll be there," I replied. "Don't be late." SPQR was David's idea of neutral territory. Upscale but not ostentatious, quiet enough for private conversation, but public enough to discourage outbursts. He was already seated when I arrived, nursing what looked like scotch and reading something on his phone with a furrowed brow. He stood as I approached, an automatic courtesy that seemed oddly out of place given our circumstances. Gone was the disheveled man who had appeared on my doorstep. This David was polished, controlled, armored in a bespoke suit and careful composure. "Thank you for coming," he said, waiting for me to sit before resuming his seat. "You said we needed to talk," I replied, accepting the wine list from the server. "I'm listening." After ordering a glass of Barolo, I met his gaze directly. The silence stretched between us, charged with things unsaid. You met with Alan Peterson today, he finally said. I did. And Charles Fitzwilliam yesterday. Also true. David's fingers tapped a restless rhythm against his water glass. You're systematically undermining business relationships I've spent years building. I'm exercising my legal rights as a managing member of Harrison Holdings, I corrected. Rights you apparently never expected me to use. This isn't about legal rights, Rebecca. It's about destroying what I've built out of spite. That's an interesting perspective from someone who hid over $10 million in assets. I kept my voice low, but the words landed like a physical blow. David froze, the color draining from his face. What are you talking about? I smiled, enjoying his obvious shock. Austin, Seattle, Nashville. Ring any bells? His eyes narrowed. Charles, he breathed, the name a curse. He had every right once I pointed out the legal implications of his sweetheart lease deal, I interrupted. Self-preservation is a powerful motivator. The server returned with my wine, providing a momentary pause in our confrontation. David used the interruption to collect himself, his expression smoothing into the neutral mask he wore for difficult client meetings. Those investments are complicated, he said once we were alone again. There are tax implications, timing considerations. Save it for your attorney, I cut him off. We've filed a motion for an emergency hearing regarding non-disclosed assets. Your law firm should receive the paperwork tomorrow. David's facade cracked, real alarm bleeding through. You're making a mistake, Rebecca. This doesn't have to be so adversarial. You made it adversarial when you lied to me, I replied evenly. When you betrayed our marriage. When you tried to manipulate me into accepting less than half of what we built together. I was trying to protect both of us, he insisted. These investments, they're high risk. I didn't want to expose our entire portfolio to that volatility. Yet you had no problem using our joint funds for the initial investments, I noted. How convenient that the profits remained solely in your control. David leaned forward, his voice dropping. What do you want, Rebecca? Just tell me what it will take to end this war you're waging. It's not a war, I said. It's a reckoning. Fine, he conceded. What will it take to resolve this reckoning? I sipped my wine, considering him. Full disclosure of all assets. A 60-40 split in my favor of everything, including Harrison Holdings. And you publicly acknowledge your misconduct. To our friends and family? His eyes widened. That's absurd. No court would award you 60%. Perhaps not, I agreed. But they might award me 100% of the assets you deliberately concealed, plus penalties, plus my legal fees. How does that math work out for you? David's jaw tightened. I'll offer 50-50 on everything, including the hidden investments. But Harrison Holdings stays with me. I'll buy you out at fair market value. Not good enough, I shook my head. Harrison Holdings is non-negotiable. Those properties are tied to my business, he protested. My professional relationships depend on them. You should have thought of that before you decided to hide millions in assets. I set down my wine glass. Or before you started sleeping with your assistant. The mention of Alexis triggered a visible flinch. Leave her out of this. Gladly, I replied. Though I wonder if she knows about your hidden millions? Or does she think she's getting the same man who claimed he wanted a simpler life, free from the burdens of our marriage? That's unfair. Life often is, I agreed, standing up. I've enjoyed our conversation, but I have a full day tomorrow. Your attorney has my terms. Either accept them, or prepare for a very public, very detailed examination of your financial deception. As I walked away, leaving my wine barely touched, I felt David's eyes on me, confused, angry, and perhaps, finally, afraid. Good. The emergency. Hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday, faster than even Veronica had anticipated. The judge, Honorable Elaine Watkins, was known for her low tolerance for financial shenanigans in divorce proceedings. "We caught a break with Judge Watkins," Veronica said as we prepared in the courthouse hallway. "She's experienced enough to understand complex financial structures but impatient with attempts to hide assets." I nodded, reviewing our documentation one last time. "David's attorney filed their response yesterday. They're claiming these investments were speculative ventures kept separate by mutual agreement." Veronica snorted. "A convenient claim with zero documentation to support it. They're grasping at straws." Inside the courtroom, David and Martin Golding were already seated at the respondents' table. David looked impeccable as always, but the tightness around his eyes betrayed his stress. He wouldn't meet my gaze as we took our places at the opposing table. Judge Watkins entered, and the proceedings began with the formal introductions. Veronica presented our motion concisely, outlining the discovery of undisclosed assets valued at approximately $10.5 million. "Your Honor," she concluded, "these investments were funded with marital assets, created during the marriage, and deliberately omitted from Mr. Harrison's financial disclosures. This represents a clear attempt to deprive Ms. Stevens of her rightful share of community property." Martin Golding rose to present David's response. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges these investments were not included in his initial disclosures, an oversight he deeply regrets. However, these were speculative, high-risk ventures that the couple had verbally agreed would remain separate from their main portfolio." Judge Watkins peered over her glasses. "Do you have any documentation of this alleged agreement, Mr. Golding?" "It was a verbal understanding, Your Honor." "How convenient," the judge remarked dryly. "Mr. Harrison, when exactly did this verbal understanding take place?" David stood, his composure intact. "Around 2019, Your Honor, when I began exploring these investment opportunities." "And Ms. Stevens was fully aware of these investments?" David hesitated just long enough for the lie to be obvious. "We discussed them, yes." I couldn't contain my scoff, drawing the judge's attention. "Ms. Stevens, you disagree with this characterization?" "Completely, Your Honor," I replied. "I had no knowledge of these investments until they were revealed to me by a third party last week. Moreover, we've provided documentation showing the initial funds came directly from our joint brokerage account." Judge Watkins turned back to David. "Mr. Harrison, did you transfer funds from joint accounts to establish these investments?" "Yes, Your Honor, but with the intention of returning both the principal and appropriate returns to our joint portfolio once the investments matured." "Yet you've held these investments for nearly 3 years without such returns being reflected in your joint accounts," the judge observed. "The timing wasn't right," David explained, his usual confidence faltering. "These are illiquid investments, with specific exit windows." Judge Watkins's expression made it clear she wasn't buying it. She reviewed the documentation for several minutes, the courtroom silent except for the occasional shuffling of papers. "Mr. Harrison," she finally said, "I've been handling divorce cases for 17 years, and I've seen every variation of hidden assets imaginable. Yours lacks even the basic creativity I've come to expect." David flushed as ripples of suppressed laughter echoed through the courtroom. "Here's what's going to happen," Judge Watkins continued. "First, I'm ordering a complete forensic accounting of all your finances, Mr. Harrison, personal and business. Every account, every investment, every dollar. Second, I'm imposing a temporary freeze on all assets associated with these undisclosed investments to prevent any further concealment." Martin. Golding rose to object, but Judge Watkins waved him down. "Save it, counselor. Your client has demonstrated bad faith in his financial disclosures, which calls into question everything else he's presented. Ms. Zhang, please prepare the necessary orders for my signature by end of day." "Yes, Your Honor," Veronica replied, not bothering to hide her satisfaction. "We'll reconvene once the forensic accounting is complete," Judge Watkins concluded. "In the meantime, I strongly suggest the parties consider mediation. Mr. Harrison's position has been significantly compromised by his actions, and he would be wise to seek a reasonable settlement before I make my final determinations. With a rap of her gavel, the hearing was adjourned. In the hallway outside, Veronica was practically glowing. That went even better than expected. A complete asset freeze and court-ordered forensic accounting. We couldn't have asked for more. What happens now? I asked. Now we wait for David to panic, she replied. Which, judging by his expression, won't take long. She was right. As we gathered our documents, David approached, Golding hovering anxiously at his elbow. We need to talk, David said, his voice tight. In private. Veronica raised an eyebrow. Any communication should be through counsel, Mr. Harrison. 2 minutes, David insisted. Just Rebecca and me. I considered him for a moment, then nodded to Veronica. It's fine. I'll meet you at the car. When we were alone in a quiet corner of the courthouse hallway, David's carefully maintained facade crumbled. You have to stop this, he said, his voice low and urgent. The asset freeze is going to destroy everything I've been building. That sounds like a problem you created for yourself, I replied. It's not just my problem, he insisted. The Nashville project has a critical funding deadline next week. If I can't make the capital call, I'll default on my obligations. I could lose everything, not just my investment, but potentially face legal action from the other partners. I studied him, searching for the manipulation beneath the panic. Why should I care about your problems with business partners you never told me about? Because half of those investments are legally yours, he replied. If they collapse due to this freeze, we both lose. A fair point, however reluctantly made. What are you proposing? I asked. Accept my last offer. 50-50 on everything, including the undisclosed investments. I'll buy you out of Harrison Holdings at market value plus a 15% premium. We can have the papers drawn up today and submit them to Judge Watkins for approval. I considered it briefly, then shook my head. Not good enough. I want Harrison Holdings. Rebecca, be reasonable. I am being extremely reasonable, I cut him off. You hid millions, lied repeatedly, and tried to manipulate me into accepting less than I deserve. The only reason you're negotiating now is because Judge Watkins has you cornered. His expression hardened. Fine. What do you want? I'll agree. To lift the asset freeze if you transfer full ownership of the Soma property to me immediately. Not as part of Harrison Holdings, but as a separate entity entirely. David stared at me in disbelief. The Soma property? With the venture tech lease? That's worth at least $7 million. I'm aware of its value, I replied. I'm also aware of its importance to your Jensen acquisition and your commission. That's extortion. That's negotiation, I corrected. Take it or leave it, but remember, every day the asset freeze remains in place, your Nashville deal gets closer to collapse. David's internal struggle played out across his face. Anger, calculation, desperation. Finally, he nodded curtly. Have your attorney draw up the paperwork, but I want the asset freeze lifted immediately upon transfer of the property. Of course, I agreed. I have no interest in destroying value. Unlike some people, I believe in honoring my commitments. The barb hit its mark. David flinched, then turned and walked away without another word. Veronica was skeptical when I explained my counteroffer. The Soma property is valuable, but it's just one asset. We had him on the ropes for everything. True, I acknowledged, but the Soma property is strategic. It's directly connected to the Jensen acquisition, and it's already leased to venture tech at premium rates for the next 5 years. It's stable, high-value income that's independent of David's business machinations. Veronica considered this. And you believe he'll agree? He doesn't have a choice. The Nashville investment will collapse if he can't meet next week's capital call. He's trapped, and he knows it. She nodded slowly. It's your decision. I'll have the transfer documents prepared immediately. The Soma property transfer was completed with remarkable speed, driven by David's desperation to lift the asset freeze. Within 48 hours, I was the sole owner of a $7 million commercial property with a guaranteed income stream from VentureTech's 5-year lease. As promised, I agreed to lift the asset freeze, allowing David to salvage his Nashville investment. The broader divorce proceedings would continue, but I'd secured my first major victory, one that would give me leverage and financial independence regardless of the final settlement. Alan. Peterson from VentureTech requested a meeting the day after the property transfer was finalized. We met at their temporary offices, where he greeted me with cautious professionalism. "Ms. Stevens, thank you for coming. I must admit, this is an unusual situation." "How so?" I asked, accepting the offered seat in their sleek conference room. "Well, we signed a lease with Harrison Holdings, and now suddenly you're our landlord." He smiled tightly. "It raises certain concerns." "Your lease remains exactly as signed," I assured him. "The only change is in ownership of the property. All terms, conditions, and obligations will be honored." "That's reassuring," Peterson nodded. "And the renovations?" "They're scheduled to be completed in 3 weeks. Will that timeline be affected?" "Not at all. The same contractors will continue their work, and you'll move in as planned." Peterson seemed to relax slightly. "I appreciate your directness." David was somewhat evasive when I asked about the ownership change. "David and I have different communication styles," I replied diplomatically. "Clearly." Peterson studied me with newfound interest. "If you don't mind me asking, what are your plans for the property long-term?" "To maintain it as a premier commercial space with quality tenants like VentureTech," I said. "Real estate has always been a passion of mine, though until recently, I allowed David to take the lead in our investments." "I see." Peterson nodded, thoughtfully. "Well, we look forward to a productive landlord-tenant relationship. And if you ever consider expanding your portfolio, VentureTech has been exploring investment partnerships in commercial properties that house tech startups." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite myself. "I'd be interested in hearing more about that at some point." "Excellent." Peterson smiled, more genuine this time. "Perhaps once we're settled in the new space, we can discuss possibilities." As I left the VentureTech offices, I felt a surge of unexpected satisfaction. Not just from securing the Soma property or from outmaneuvering David, but from being taken seriously as a business person in my own right. For years, I'd set aside my professional ambitions to support David's career and our marriage. Now, ironically, his betrayal had forced me to reclaim those ambitions. My phone buzzed with a text from Mia. "Heard about the Soma coup. Drinks to celebrate?" "Absolutely," I replied. "I have a feeling this is just the beginning." Walking to my car, I glanced up at the Soma skyline, my eyes finding the distinctive silhouette of what was now my building. My property, my income stream, my first step toward a new identity that had nothing to do with being David Harrison's wife, and everything to do with being Rebecca Stevens, property owner and businesswoman. David might have left me for his secretary, but now he would have to answer to me as VentureTech's landlord. Every month when that lease payment arrived, it would be a reminder of the power he'd never expected me to claim, and that was just the first installment in a much larger debt. 3 months after securing the Soma property, I sat across from Veronica, in her office, reviewing the final settlement agreement. The document represented countless hours of negotiation, forensic accounting, and strategic planning, a comprehensive roadmap for disentangling my life from David's. "Are you satisfied with these terms?" Veronica asked, watching me closely as I flipped through the pages. I nodded slowly. "More than satisfied. When this started, I just wanted what was fair. This exceeds my expectations." The settlement outlined a clean division of assets. I would retain the Pacific Heights home, my personal investment accounts, and of course the Soma property. David would keep the Lake Tahoe cabin, his personal accounts, and the remaining Harrison Holdings properties. minus the significant equalizing payment he'd been forced to make after the full forensic accounting revealed yet another hidden investment account. Judge Watkins was instrumental, Veronica acknowledged. Her preliminary findings regarding the hidden assets shifted the entire negotiation in our favor. David never expected to be caught, I said, signing the final page. That was always his weakness, underestimating me. Veronica gathered the signed documents, her expression thoughtful. What are your plans now? Will you sell the Pacific Heights house? I shook my head. Not immediately. I've grown attached to it despite the memories. Besides, the real estate market is stronger for commercial properties right now. Speaking of which, Veronica said, handing me a slim folder, the final deed transfer for the Soma property was recorded yesterday. It's officially yours, free and clear. I opened the folder, running my fingers over the document that confirmed my ownership of a $7 million commercial property. More than just an asset, it represented my independence, my resilience, and, yes, a measure of justice. Thank you, Veronica, for everything. She smiled, a rare softening of her usually formidable demeanor. It's been a pleasure watching you transform, from shocked spouse to formidable businesswoman. Not all my clients make that journey so successfully. After leaving Veronica's office, I had one more stop to make before I could truly close this chapter of my life. The drive to David's new apartment took me through parts of the city I rarely visited. A high-rise development that screamed temporary and transitional, nothing like the home we'd built together. David had texted earlier, asking to meet in person, before we signed the final papers. Against Veronica's advice, I had agreed. Some endings needed face-to-face closure, no matter how painful. He buzzed me up immediately. The apartment was sleek and impersonal, with rental furniture and bare walls, a stark contrast to our art-filled home. David looked oddly diminished. In this space, his usual commanding presence muted. Thank you for coming, he said, gesturing toward the living area. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Wine? I'm fine, I replied, taking a seat on the minimalist sofa. You wanted to talk before tomorrow's signing? David nodded, sitting across from me. Up close, I could see the toll the past few months had taken. New lines around his eyes, a certain heaviness in his movements. I wanted to say some things without lawyers present, he began. Things that won't change the settlement but need to be said nonetheless. I waited, curious despite myself. I was wrong, he said simply. Not just about us, but about you. I convinced myself you were content being just my wife, that you'd lost your ambition, your edge. These past months have proven how completely I misjudged you. Yes, I agreed. You did. I also want to apologize for the hidden investments, he continued. It was never about keeping money from you. It was about proving something to myself, that I could build something entirely on my own, separate from our marriage. By using our joint funds, I pointed out. He had the grace to look ashamed. Like I said, I was wrong, on all counts. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history filling the space between us. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythm, lights coming on in neighboring buildings as dusk approached. What about Alexis? I finally asked, surprising myself with the question. I'd deliberately avoided any mention of her throughout the divorce proceedings. David's expression tightened. We're no longer together. That was quick. She left shortly after the emergency hearing, he admitted. Said she needed space to reevaluate. Apparently, dating a man going through a high-conflict divorce wasn't what she had imagined. I couldn't help the small, vindictive surge of satisfaction at this news. How unfortunate. It was for the best, David said, his tone neutral. The relationship was built on fantasy, not reality. Unlike our marriage, I couldn't resist asking. He met my gaze directly. Our marriage was real, Rebecca. Flawed, ultimately unsuccessful, but real, at least for me. I considered his words, searching for the manipulation beneath them but finding only tired honesty. Why did you ask me here, David? To apologize? To tell me about Alexis? Is this about clearing your conscience? Partly, he acknowledged. But also to tell you I respect what you've accomplished. The way you've handled yourself throughout this process has been impressive. A compliment I hadn't expected and wasn't sure I wanted. I've simply protected what's rightfully mine. You've done more than that, he countered. You've positioned yourself for an entirely new future. The Soma property, your connections with venture tech, you're building something. I was surprised he'd noticed or cared. I'm exploring possibilities. I heard Peterson offered you a seat on their advisory board for real estate acquisitions. News traveled fast in their circles. I'm considering it. David nodded, something like pride flickering across his face. You'll be excellent at it. You always had better instincts for property than I did. I just wouldn't admit it. The conversation had taken a turn I hadn't anticipated. This wasn't the angry, defensive David who had confronted me on my doorstep months ago, nor the calculating businessman who had tried to manipulate me at Gary Danko. This was someone else. Someone humbled. Is that all? I asked, suddenly eager to leave. Almost. He stood, retrieving an envelope from the kitchen counter. This is for you. Not part of the settlement, just something I wanted you to have. I accepted the envelope cautiously. What is it? Information about a property in the Marina District. It's coming on the market next month. Off-market listing, very quiet. It would make an excellent addition to your portfolio. The owner is a former client who trusts my judgment. He'll give you first right of refusal if you're interested. I stared at him, puzzled by this unexpected gesture. Why would you give me this opportunity? David shrugged, a ghost of his old confidence returning. Consider it a peace offering, or karmic rebalancing, or simply a good tip from someone who recognizes your talents. I placed the envelope in my purse, still uncertain of his motives, but unwilling to reject potentially valuable information out of pride. Thank you, I said cautiously. I'll look into it. As I stood to leave, David took a step toward me, then stopped himself. I never wanted to be enemies, Rebecca. Neither did I replied honestly. But you made choices that forced me to protect myself. I know, he acknowledged, and you did exactly that. Brilliantly. At the door, I turned back for one last look at the man I had once built a life with. Goodbye, David. Goodbye, Rebecca, and good luck with whatever comes next. Walking to my car, I felt lighter somehow, as if the final threads binding me to our past had been severed. The anger that had fueled me these past months was still there, but muted now, no longer all-consuming. Tomorrow we would sign the final papers, and legally, officially, my marriage to David Harrison would be over. But in all the ways that mattered, I had already moved on. 1 year later, the view from my new office was spectacular. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the San Francisco Bay, with the Golden Gate Bridge visible on clear days like today. I'd had the space designed to my exact specifications, modern but warm, impressive but comfortable. A place where I could build my growing real estate empire. Stevens Properties LLC had expanded rapidly in the 12 months since my divorce was finalized. What had begun with the Soma property had grown to include 3 additional commercial buildings and 2 residential developments. The advisory position with VentureTech had opened doors I hadn't anticipated, connecting me with investors, eager to partner with someone who understood both the legal and practical aspects of commercial real estate. The quarterly reports are ready for your review, my assistant announced, placing a folder on my desk. And Mr. Peterson called to confirm your meeting tomorrow about the Oakland project. Thank you, Jessica. I opened the folder, scanning the numbers with satisfaction. The Soma property continued to be my most profitable holding, with VentureTech now fully established in their space and thriving. I was about to close the folder when a particular line item caught my eye. A new subtenant occupying 2,000 square feet on the building's third floor. Harrison Financial Advisors. A smile spread across my face as I remembered the call I'd received 3 months ago from Martin Golding, of all people. David is starting his own financial advisory firm, he'd explained. He's looking for office space, and frankly, he's having some challenges securing appropriate accommodations. Challenges? I'd asked, feigning ignorance. The non-compete from his previous firm is restrictive. He's had to start smaller than anticipated, and commercial landlords are hesitant given his limited client base. He's asked me to inquire, on a purely professional basis, whether you might consider leasing him space in the Soma building. VentureTech has that extra section they're not using yet. The irony had been delicious. David, seeking space in my building. Needing my approval to establish his new business, preparing to pay rent to me every month. Have him submit a formal application, I'd replied, keeping my voice neutral. I'll consider it like any other potential tenant. When the application arrived, I'd reviewed it thoroughly. David's new venture was modest compared to his previous position, a boutique advisory firm focused on sustainable investments with just 2 other employees. His financials were solid but not spectacular. His business plan was sound. There was no logical reason to reject him as a tenant. And perhaps, a small part of me acknowledged, no emotional reason either. The anger that had driven me through the divorce had faded, replaced by a steady confidence in my own path forward. I'd approved the application with one stipulation, a personal guarantee on the lease. If his business failed, David himself would be responsible for the remaining payments. He'd signed without objection. Now, reviewing the quarterly report, I noted with satisfaction that Harrison Financial Advisors had paid their first 3 months' rent promptly, with the 4th payment due next week. My assistant's voice interrupted my thoughts. Ms. Stevens, your 2:00 appointment is here. The developer for the Marina District project? Send him in, I replied, closing the folder. The Marina project, the one David had tipped me off about in that final meeting before our divorce, had proven to be exactly the opportunity he'd promised. I'd secured the property at a favorable price and was now overseeing its transformation into luxury condominiums, with pre-sales already exceeding projections. As I prepared to greet the developer, my phone buzzed with a text from Mia. Ran into David at the courthouse. He mentioned he's your tenant now. Justice is sweet. I smiled, typing back. Justice pays monthly, with automatic deposits. Putting my phone away, I straightened the framed certificate on my wall. My newly renewed law license. After years of consulting work, I'd decided to reactivate my credentials, not to return to practice, but to better position myself in the complex world of commercial real estate development. The developer entered, a competent woman in her 40s, with whom I'd established an excellent working relationship. As we began discussing construction timelines and permit approvals, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This was what I had been building toward, even before I realized it. Not just financial independence or revenge against David, but a life shaped entirely by my own choices and ambitions. Later that afternoon, I took a detour on my way home, driving past the Soma building that had started it all. The renovations were complete, the VentureTech logo prominent on the front facade. I pulled into the parking garage, nodding to the security guard who recognized me as the owner. On the 3rd floor, I paused outside the modest offices of Harrison Financial Advisors. Through the glass doors, I could see David at his desk, deep, in conversation with a client. He looked up suddenly, as if sensing my presence, our eyes meeting across the distance. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then David nodded, a simple acknowledgement of me, of our history, of the strange circular path that had brought him here, to my building, paying rent for the privilege of rebuilding his career in the shadow of what he'd lost. I nodded back, then continued walking. That evening, as I sat on the terrace of my Pacific Heights home, the home I'd decided to keep after all, I reviewed the contract for my newest acquisition. My phone buzzed with a notification, a rent payment from Harrison Financial Advisors arriving early. I smiled, picturing David signing the authorization, perhaps thinking of our brief encounter that afternoon. Life had a way of creating its own particular justice. He had left me for his young secretary, tossing aside our marriage as if it were nothing more than an outdated investment. Now he wrote me checks every month for the privilege of building his new life. Not out of guilt or court-ordered alimony, but as a business transaction between landlord and tenant. A transaction in which I held all the power he had once taken for granted. As the sun set over San Francisco, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I raised my glass in a private toast. To new beginnings, to reclaimed ambitions, to the unexpected paths that lead us exactly where we need to be, and yes, to monthly reminders of lessons painfully learned, by both of us. 6 months later, the expansion plans look excellent, Alan. Peterson said, reviewing the proposal spread across my conference table. VentureTech is prepared to commit to the additional square footage as soon as renovations are complete. Perfect, I replied, making notes on my tablet. We can begin construction next month. The 4th floor will be available by Q3. This expansion would increase VentureTech's footprint in the SoMa building by nearly 40%, making them my largest and most profitable tenant. Their growth had exceeded everyone's expectations, including their own. There is one matter to discuss, Peterson added, his tone shifting slightly. The 3rd floor. I looked up. What about it? We'd like to take over the entire floor eventually. Currently, there are 2 smaller tenants occupying about 30% of the space. One of those tenants being Harrison Financial Advisors. I kept my expression neutral. Both have multi-year leases. We understand. Peterson nodded. But perhaps when those leases come up for renewal, we could have first right of refusal? Of course, I agreed. That's a reasonable arrangement. As Peterson gathered his materials, preparing to leave, he hesitated. One of those tenants is your ex-husband's firm, correct? I've noticed his name on the directory. Yes, I acknowledged. Harrison Financial Advisors. They've been tenants for about 9 months now. Peterson's lips twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. That must be interesting. It's strictly business, I replied evenly. After Peterson left, I sat at my desk, contemplating this new development. In approximately 2 years, when David's lease came up for renewal, I would have a decision to make. Renew his lease at a higher rate, or reclaim the space for VentureTech's expansion. A strictly business decision, of course. My assistant interrupted my thoughts. Ms. Stevens, Mr. Harrison is here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's regarding his lease. I raised an eyebrow, surprised. David and I had maintained a strictly professional distance since he became my tenant. All communications had been handled through property managers or assistants. Send him in, I decided. David entered my office with the confident stride I remembered, though tempered now with a new sense of caution. He looked well, successful even, in a tailored suit that suggested his boutique firm was finding its footing. Rebecca, he greeted me. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. What can I do for you, David? I gestured to the chair across from my desk. I'll be brief, he said, sitting down. I've heard rumors that VentureTech is planning to expand. News traveled fast in commercial real estate circles. They are. We're renovating the 4th floor for them. And the 3rd floor? He asked. Where my offices are located. I studied him for a moment. Eventually, yes. They're interested in taking over the entire floor when current leases expire. David nodded, absorbing this information. I see. And what are your plans regarding those leases? I haven't made any decisions yet, I replied truthfully. Your lease has nearly 2 years remaining. A lot can change in that time. Indeed, he agreed. Which is why I'm here. Harrison Financial has been growing faster than projected. We're already finding our current space somewhat constraining. This was news to me. Are you looking to break your lease? Not at all. David shook his head. I'm looking to expand. There's vacant space on the second floor, about 3,000 square feet. I'd like to lease it in addition to our current offices. I leaned back in my chair, genuinely surprised. You want to expand your footprint in my building? It makes financial and practical sense, he replied. The location is excellent, the building well managed, and moving offices entirely would disrupt client relationships we're still establishing. Even knowing VentureTech might claim your current space when your lease expires, David met my gaze directly. By then, we'll be established enough to negotiate from a position of strength, or relocate if necessary. In the meantime, I'd rather focus on growth than potential future constraints. It was a reasonable business proposition, presented professionally and logically. Nothing in David's demeanor suggested ulterior motives or lingering resentment. Submit a formal application, I said finally. I'll review it like any other tenant request. Thank you. David stood, preparing to leave, then paused. I hear the Marina District project is nearly sold out. Congratulations. Thank you, I replied, somewhat surprised by the genuine note in his voice. It's exceeded expectations. Not mine, he said simply. I always knew you had exceptional instincts for property development. I just failed to appreciate them properly. With that, he left, leaving me to contemplate this strange new dynamic between us. No longer spouses, not quite friends, but something more complex than merely landlord and tenant. I pulled up the floor plans for the building on my tablet, examining the vacant space on the second floor. It was premium real estate with excellent natural light and corner views. I could easily lease it to any number of interested parties at top market rates, but there was a certain poetic justice in allowing David's firm to expand within my building. Every additional square foot meant additional rent flowing from his business to mine. Every successful client he brought into those offices would indirectly contribute to my bottom line. I smiled, making a note to review his application favorably when it arrived. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't about destruction or retaliation, but about building something new and unexpected from the ashes of betrayal. David had left me for his secretary, thinking he was moving toward something better, something simpler. Instead, he now paid rent to me every month, not just for his original offices, but soon for an expanded space where he would build the next chapter of his career under my roof, on my terms. Life had a peculiar way of coming full circle, and this circle, I had to admit, was particularly satisfying. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe.